The topic we're covering this afternoon is surfacing external data through Magnolia. There are a couple of different ways and reasons you might want to do that. Of course, if you run some kind of news site, RSS has become ascendant. It's very helpful to be able to pull in feeds from other sites to republish them through yours. If you're using Twitter, for example, as a means of public communication, you might want to pull in your Twitter feeds and publish them through your site. We, in our case, have a directory of people for each of the departments within our organization. So being able to pull that information from our human resources system and publish it through one of our departmental websites has been a really valuable thing for us. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through the slides this afternoon. We've got a fair bit of material to cover. If anything is unclear or if I'm speaking too quickly, please wave at me and I'll try to slow down and make it a little more obvious. We're going to talk about three approaches to surfacing external data. The first of those is using JSP or servlet, sort of the traditional Java way. The second is using Magnolia's data module. And then the third is by using the RSS module. The latter two are Magnolia-specific things. The JSP approach is one that you could use in pretty much any Java environment. So let's look at that a little bit. We're going to talk about, again, JSP. We, in our case, I'd mentioned we're publishing department directories as part of our websites. What we wanted to do is to give each of our site editors the ability to make just a few choices on their site. So what we've done is created a little dialogue for them, and I don't know how well you can see it, but up at the top it's asking for the title for this paragraph, and the second control is one for the name of the department. So we have, how many departments do we have? Probably several hundred departments within the university. So we give them a pick list from which they can choose their own department. And then the bottom pop-up is a filter that lets them determine whether they want to display faculty, staff, or both on this particular directory listing. So we give them a very simple interface to create these directories and give them something that's very rich and useful in return. This is what our department directories look like. Now it's a little hard to see, I'm sorry, but it has name and job title. It has various contact information, whether they're faculty, whether they're staff, phone numbers, all that sort of thing. So because this information is being pulled from our human resources system, it updates dynamically. Whenever somebody is added to a department or somebody's removed from the department, their web page gets updated without any further work on their part, which they like a good deal. Another nice feature that we've built into this is support for microformats. So if anybody's looking at a department directory and they have support for microformats on their browser, they're able to just click a button and import any of these names into their address book on their computer. So it creates a really nice, bit of functionality for them that's very easy for people to use. Microformats aren't hugely supported yet, but we want it to be a little bit ahead of the curve where those things are concerned. The way that we've implemented this is by using an XML RPC web service to retrieve the data from our backend database in real time. So we've defined a couple of methods. One of those is get department list, which we use to actually get the list of departments, as you might expect, and then get results. We'll do a query on a particular department. So here's a little bit of code for you to look at. This first bit is how we've done the custom control. Back here on this screen, this is our listing of departments, our pop-up list of departments, which you can see another rendering of down here. So we've just created a custom control that in this case goes out and gets a reference to the dialog object within the Magnolia dialog, and then creates an XML RPC client. We used a client library called XML RPC Lite, which we like pretty well. It's easy to use. It basically lets you make these XML RPC calls using standard Java data structures and get standard Java data structures back. So it does all your parsing and formatting and network communication for you. So we set one of those up. We point it to the machine where the web service is hosted. We tell it what method we want to use. In this case, we're getting the list of departments, so we use getDepartmentList. We create a new vector for the parameter list. In this case, since we're just asking for the department list, we don't have to add anything to that parameter list. It's just an empty parameter list, but the way that XML RPC is structured, it expects to have that parameter list there, even if there's nothing in it. And then we call the execute method. We get a vector of results back and essentially iterate through those results and build a new select option for each one of those. So we have our entire list of available departments there for people to choose from. And this also, because it's pulling from the live system, gets updated whenever a new department gets added to the university, and nobody has to do anything special there. We then take that selection and use it to go actually get the department directory listing. So you can see here we instantiate another instance of the RPC client, call the web service again, get our department from what's been set in the dialog before, and get the filter that we set in that dialog, and use those to build the search terms that are going to be passed as a parameter to the XML RPC call this time around. So we use the get results method, we pass those search terms and get our results, and then go and iterate through it again. In this case, we look at each person. We can retrieve the first name for that person simply by doing a get method on that person object with first name as the parameter, and then coercing it to a string, and then get the last name in the same way. And then we go through and build our HTML based on those results. So does that make sense so far? Okay, great. So there are pros and cons to this approach. The pros are that it's very quick and easy to implement. If you've done JSP work before, this is nothing new to you. You don't need anything in the way of additional Magnolia modules aside from what you're using to actually retrieve the data, so the XML RPC client in our case. And it uses familiar techniques. If you're already a Java developer, you pretty well know how to do this sort of thing. The cons are that it introduces some page caching issues. Because you want your data to always be current, you either have to not cache or figure out a way to renew your cache periodically to make sure that your data is up to date. Performance can be an issue too. Since we're retrieving the data in real time when a page is loaded, we have to wait to get the call back from the XML RPC server. So if it takes a while to give us the data back, the page is going to take longer to render, which obviously isn't ideal. And to elaborate on that a little bit more, we're pretty well at the mercy of our connection to the data source. If our connection goes down, then these department directory listings are gone. So it's not an ideal situation in that case. And the last downside is you pretty well do have to write it all yourself. You don't get any support here. You're doing all your own work. So any questions about the JSP approach? All right, moving on. Next to the data module. The data module was introduced in Magnolia 4.0, I believe, and it requires the scheduler module to underpin it and a bit of patience with it. There's some documentation available on the website. I believe that lives on the wiki, but I can give you the URL a little bit later if you need that. And this is also up on Google Docs, so we have links to those bits of documentation. There's an example that focuses on managing footers using the data module as well, which isn't necessarily a typical use, but it does give you some example code and some insight into how the system works. So let's look at it a little bit more. We're going to dive right in and do a little demonstration of how to create a new data type. So the data module has been conceived as kind of a document management system. Has anybody used the DMS? Are we familiar with that? Okay, so it's basically the DMS, but for structured data. Similar concepts to a large degree, but it's designed to work with structured data specifically. So let's pop over here to Magnolia. And you'll see that when you have the data module installed, there's a data item on your menu on the left. You can open that up and see a list of various bits of functionality. We'll go through most of those together in a minute. What we're going to do first is define a new type of data. It comes with a couple of example data types already installed. One is just a simple example, one is a contact information, and the RSS module also installs one called RSS aggregator that it relies on, and we'll look a little bit more at that later on. What we're going to do is define a new event type a new data type for special events. So the first thing we do is go down here and choose new type, and we enter a bit of data on what we want our event to be like. So this one is the machine readable version of the event. So we're going to, actually I think we'll go with that. And for our human readable version, we'll do special events. And we'll find a calendar, a little icon to use with this. I want to mention real quickly, there's a project out there called the Silk, which is a collection of very small icons that are really useful for this sort of application. They're just 16 by 16, and they're delivered in ping format. So if you're looking for a library of those, look for the Silk project. We then enter the root path for where we want our data to be stored. So by default, things are going to go into the data repository, and then we're going to specify a subdirectory in that data repository. So in our case, we want all our events to go into this events node. You can specify additional custom node types. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this, but it's available to you if you need it. You can also specify whether or not you want to allow folders for this data type, and whether you want to keep them sorted automatically by name, or whether you want to use the more standard JCR ordering where you can drag things around to get them where you want them to be. So that's pretty much all there is to creating a new data type. At this point, if we hit save, you can see it's listed in our data types over here. And a little more interesting, if you refresh the page now, oh, stop that. Do it that way. If you refresh the page and go into data now, there's a new item listed here called special events. And this is basically a browser that shows where our special events get stored. Now, since we've just created this data type, it doesn't have a lot of definition to it. If you go to create a new one, it just has a name field. The data structures are defined pretty much like any other Magnolia dialog is. Have folks created Magnolia dialogs? Are you familiar with using the controls in there? So it's a very similar kind of thing. What we can do is go to our configuration here, and this will show us the dialogues that are defined for the various data types. Here's our new event one, and you can see that it looks just like any other Magnolia dialog. It's got a main tab here that has the name field in it. So what we'll do, just to show how this works, is add a new date node. Oops. And then I'll keep that open as my model and create a couple items under there. One of which is our control type. In this case, we'll use a date control. And our label, which, again, is just our human readable form. So just by doing those couple of things, we can go back to our special events area, enter a new special event. Whoa, now that should have worked. I have angered the demo gods, apparently.
The tree was too narrow. If you go back to the configuration.
Yes.
Now, push the line a bit further so you must be named control type.
Thank you, thank you. Well caught. I was running this at a higher resolution when I ran through it before, so I could see more of that column. Thank you. There it is. Thank you. So you can see that defining new attributes for your data types is pretty straightforward. In this case, we'll enter a few here. There's one we all know a little something about. And you can see that the date control's available there in its usual friendly fashion. I'm going to be a little narcissistic, and I'll enter my birthday as well. And that's not actually my birthday, but so you can see right here, we've added a couple of event types already. We've created the event type. Where's this data being stored? There's a JCR browser that you can use as part of your data module here as well. And you can see under events, it lists each of the events that we've created now. And you can root into those and see the attributes, and they all appear there as standard JCR data. All that makes sense? Good? Okay. So moving on, there is another important part of the data module. What we've seen so far is how you can create your data types and put data in manually. The data module also includes import handlers, which are designed for importing data automatically. So if you don't want to have to go in and enter all the data yourself, you can use import handlers. This is ideal for when you're pulling in from other systems or need to do recurring, regular import jobs. It's built on top of the scheduler module, which is a really terrific module that basically provides sort of cron-like functionality for a Magnolia system. You can schedule recurring events, and you can basically do all the specifications of how that works like you would with cron. It provides an automated means to bring in new data, and the information on how your import handlers are configured is stored at modules, data, config, importers. So you can see those. Oops. Yeah, they're there. We'll look at those in a minute. The basic way that this works is there are two classes you're going to need to be aware of to use this. The first of these is import target. The import target is basically a class that exists only to collect the options you're going to use for your import session. So that will necessarily include a place to put your data. It can include other options depending on what sort of system you're using. That part's entirely up to you. The bare minimum is just where is it going to go, though. And you can either use the import target that Magnolia has written, or you can subclass it and add your own if you need to be able to provide more options to the import process. The other part is the part that actually does the work. This is the import handler, which you'll need to make a subclass of. It's an abstract class, so you can't use it as is, but you can write a subclass that will include your logic for importing the data from your external system. And you do that in the doImport method. So you can see here we have a little bit of a setup for one of these import handlers. There are a variety of options available to you. The first one is which import target you're going to be using. So in this case, we're using simple import target, which is a subclass of that import target. It adds a few more fields, a few more options that you can specify. Generally, for a lot of cases, you're going to be able to just use the import target or the simple import target that they've already provided for us. And one of the parameters we're specifying, one of the options we're specifying is the target path. Where is this data going to go when we pull it into the system? So in this case, this is going in the data repository under the example path there. The automated execution area lets you set up the schedule to use. Again, this is a cron-like pattern. If you're used to Unix cron, this is more a Java cron. It's got 6 fields instead of 5 fields. The first one's just seconds. Don't worry too much about it. So this one's every 6 a.m. every day, I believe. And you can turn it on and off from here. So if you have a task that's causing difficulty, you can just disable it temporarily from the console rather than having to do any kind of large-scale configuration changes. There is an option to allow you to activate the data that you've pulled in automatically. So if you're bringing in data on a regular schedule and you want it to be pushed out to your public servers as soon as it's brought in, you can change that to true, and Magnolia will take care of that for you automatically. And this is our import handler. This is the one that we have to actually write the code to bring in the data. You can also specify whether or not you want old data to be deleted. I believe the function of this depends on the name. So if you have an item you bring in and it has the same name as data that's already in there, it will, depending on whether you have this set, either overwrite that old data or not. And you can set up your repository to be locked during import so nobody else can fool with that data. This is a little bit dangerous because it's possible to leave your JCR, sorry, I'm running on battery power. It's possible if you set that lock on import to true that if your import process crashes along the way, it's going to leave your database in a very messy state. So generally, it's best to leave that off. And then the last item, of course, is the repository. By default, you'll be going into the data repository, but if you need to bring the data into a different part of your system, you can do that as well. All of that more or less clear? Yes, if you yeah, there's a sample. Actually, this datetime import handler is one that's included by default, and it basically creates sample data just periodically. It's not actually pulling from an external source, but and we'll actually look at a little bit of that in just a moment. So to make it a little more clear, the import target, again, just a container for your options, and this is the entire source code of the class that's provided. It gives us a field for name and a field for target path. Again, often that's going to be entirely enough for what we need to do. And here is the datetime import handler, which there's some code that I've taken out just for clarity, but basically what it does is when this do import method is called, it runs this block of code here. You can see we have our import target, which is what we specified in the configuration. And we also have an item called parent. Now, what you would probably think is you would look at the import target, look at the path that's specified there, and use that. What you actually want to do is use the parent content item and put your data in there. The reason for that is because when the process is pulling in your data and then does the resolution between the old data and new data, it needs to have copies of both to compare. So when you load up your data, it goes into the parent object, and then the data module will compare the new data to the old one and put it where it's ultimately going. So you just pay attention to the parent content item in that case. The API also requires that we return a list of the unique identifiers for any new content items that we create. So there's an empty set that's passed to your method as part of the call, and you just fill that in as you go. You can see in this case we create a data object. We just basically make a new name, which is going to be imported sample data 0, 1, 2, 3. Then create the new data node, write data into that node, and then save that data into, again, the parent content object, and add its UUID to the set that we need to return. So once all that's done, once you've got your content in, you just return. Magnolia will then resolve the old and new and put it where it's ultimately going. Once you have data in your system, you want to be able to get it out. So there are a couple different ways to do that. The first of those is using JCR Queries. If any of you all have looked at JCR Queries, you know that they're very powerful in terms of being able to select subsections of your data, but they're also kind of hard to use sometimes. The JCR 170 specification is the best place I've found for information on building those queries. The user list is also very useful. There are some people on that list who have more experience with this and are often willing to help. I can show you real quickly how those would work. We've created our events already, so we can then go and run our where is that? Nope. Thank you. We can run our JCR queries down here, and as you probably know, we have a choice of languages to run them in. This is the SQL format. If you just do a select star from event and execute that, you'll see over on, yes, thank you. What would I do without you guys? There it is. So there's the data that we've already entered. Likewise, the XPath format is also available to you. I'll just skip that one for now, but if you prefer the XPath format, you're able and welcome to use that as well. The other option, if you don't want to use the JCR queries, is to actually just use the API and route through the node hierarchy. In this case, what we do here, by way of example, is we can go get a hierarchy manager so we can interact with the repository there. We get content, we get our event node where we're storing all that data, and then we get an iterator to cycle through its children. One thing to be careful of here is that you have to specify the type of node you're wanting to retrieve in accordance with what you specified when you set up the data type. So in this case, we created event was the name of our data type, so we're using that as our parameter here. Then you can iterate through those just like you would any other bit of content in the JCR, get the node data, convert it to strings, and spit it out to your HTML. One last caveat on this is if you're building functionality in your module that depends on the data module, you'll need to include it as a dependency in your POM just to make sure that the data module has been loaded before your module is. Otherwise, if you try to bootstrap data, it's not going to know what to do with it because it doesn't have the definitions from that module yet. So for the data module, it has various pros and cons as well. The data is cached in the JCR, and as a result, it's resilient to temporary disconnects from your data source. If we had built our department directory using this, it wouldn't matter so much if we weren't able to access the data because it would still be in the Magnolia repository, and we would just not have fresh data until that connection were restored. You can enter data manually through Admin Central or import data automatically. So you have various ways of getting data into the system. The cons are you still pretty much have to write it all yourself. You've got some infrastructure to build on, but all of the importing of content and all of the rendering of content is still up to you. And it does require learning another framework. It's not too vast, but it's a little bit more to get under your belt before you can use it effectively. So, any questions about the data module? Great, moving on. The last one is RSS content. RSS, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is a format for syndicating data that originated with weblogs. It's used through a variety of news sources and lots of places actually these days. So let's talk about that for a minute. We have official documentation for the RSS module that's out on Magnolia's site. Jan also did a weblog entry when he created most of this, and it's got some really good information on how to use the RSS module as well. It also requires one of the newer versions of Magnolia. It builds on top of the scheduler module, so it needs that and the data module available. And it's actually coded on top of the Roam project, which is a set of libraries that are designed for importing RSS and Atom feeds and manipulating them in various ways. It's a terrific piece of work. And we actually had built RSS functionality in our system before the RSS module was available and used the Roam project as well. So we like it a lot. There are a couple of places that are worth being aware of once you've got the RSS module installed. The first of those is under your data folder. You have the RSS aggregators. That basically is the area where you'll set up the RSS sources that you're wanting to bring into your system. The second area is under configuration. There's an RSS aggregator section, and that will let you do some control of the RSS module from there. So we'll look at both of those in just a moment. Just a moment being right now. So if we go in here and go to, back up to data, and to RSS aggregators, you can see that there are a few entries there already by default. If you, and let me just be clear on this, each of these items is a collection of RSS feeds. So you can have an arbitrary number of feeds collected into one aggregation like this. So if we were to develop a new feed or a new collection of feeds, excuse me, you might do something like this, and and you need a and you can go down here and enter names of the individual feeds and the URLs for those feeds as well. Another nice feature that's been built into this is the filter. You can do regular expression matches on various fields within your RSS data. So if, for example, you were sucking in all of Google's news, but you were only interested in republishing something that had news about Magnolia, you could just enter Magnolia as your filter term here, and it would only bring in the content that related to Magnolia. So it's pretty easy to set these up. I'll show you the ones that ship by default. There's a sample with the various blogs from various Magnolia folks, and you can see there's a variety there. They all get grouped together, and you can publish them in various ways from there. The way that you tell Magnolia to go collect the information from those is to pop on down to your RSS aggregator, and click the Start Update button. You can, well, I can see. Here, I'll show it so you can see. In the background, the module then goes and grabs each of the feeds from the various sources you've specified and imports that data into the database. And you can set up automatic updates as well. So if you want to get the content on a regular schedule, you just do it that way. And let me get back to the right place here. Okay. Okay, so with the RSS modules, the pros here are that it's really easy to set up. It includes several useful, I'm sorry, I forgot to show you those. Let me go back for just a moment. The system includes 2 different paragraph types that are built into it. If you look at the demo project that ships with the standard templating kit, you can see, that's not where they went. Under aggregation paragraphs, You can see the bottom one shows off the different aggregation paragraphs that are available to you. One of them basically takes all those different feeds that you specify as part of your aggregation and mixes the content together according to its published date. So you could have an article from CNN and then an article from Google and then another article from CNN, just depending on when each of those was published. Then the other one breaks them up according to the feed that they're coming from. So you can see here, this is the aggregated one. And then down here, it's actually split up according to the individual web logs that are being republished. So you can see how those work. Okay, so the pros, again, easy setup. It includes several useful paragraphs right out of the box, so you're able to use RSS content without having to write any additional code at all. It's a very nice bit of functionality, and you can get started with it very quickly. The only significant con to it is that it's limited to only using content that's published in RSS format. So there's content that's out there. Tell me more.
Yeah, there is actually, I think it's generator, or there is a class which allows you, for example, if you look at Magnolia 4.1, there is already a producer which just looks through the content, like news articles published on your site and produces RSS feed from that. So you are not limited to RSS.
Right. What Jan is saying there is that there's also functionality within the RSS module that I didn't cover here, and it will actually generate RSS content from the content that's in your Magnolia system. And you do have to write one class to sort of link together the various content fields from your particular content to what the RSS format would expect. But you can use it actually for generation as well as for consumption of RSS content. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So any questions about the RSS module? All right. Any questions on anything? All right. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.